Blog post 101. Date, October 5th. Followers, 62,897. The truth is, I didn't know where to begin, so I helped Finn lift Noah onto the sofa. He knelt down and moved his fingertips against his brother's neck until he found a pulse. His heart beats strong, I confirmed. It's slow, but it's there.
I don't know what's real anymore. None of this makes sense,
Finn said, without looking up. Even now, my heart hurts when I think about the hopelessness he was obviously feeling. Don't get me wrong, I felt desperate, but at least I knew what was going on. To some extent. I understood the world we were living in, but Finn's grasp on reality had been shattered in the cruelest way possible. It gets easier, I said, only half believing myself. When Glen had taken V, he had woken up by now. That was the thought that kept running through my head. He'd stirred after only a few minutes, but Noah hadn't. This was different, exactly as Kalina had said. I stared at the hands which had earlier been holding me as we lay in bed together when we believed we had all the time in the world ahead of us. As tears started to fill my eyes, I shook this thought away as quickly as I could. We were already in too much of a blood crisis for me to waste water crying. The sound of the street filtered into the room as I waited for Finn to say more. Having removed his fingers from Noah's neck, he seemed unsure what to do with his hands. He placed them briefly on his knees, then changed position and dug them into his pockets, all without saying a word. He would have been perfectly within his rights to yell at me, and not just about the whole vampire thing, or the fact I was seeing his brother. He could probably have listed 20 reasons as to why I was in the wrong, and I waited to hear them all. But in the end, what he said was,
"Does it? Or do you just get numb to it?"
In my head, I'd imagined this scene 100 times. Probably more like 1,000. After all, the reason I'd ended up siring Christopher had been because I'd gone to see Finn, to tell him the truth about what I was. It had played like a movie in my mind, but now I couldn't think of a single thing to say. "I'm sorry," was all I could manage. To my surprise, when Finn looked up, his forehead was wrinkled in confusion.
"What for? You didn't ask for this. I might not know much, but I can see that. You didn't ask to be whatever you are."
"I'm a vampire," I said. Believe me, I know how ridiculous that sounds, but it's true.
"Like she is."
I didn't need any clarification to know who she was. The comparison between myself and Kalina irked me more than I would have believed, as did the fact that Finn's thoughts went almost straight to her. But then, he must have had strong feelings for her at some point. Strong enough to marry her. "No, I am not like her," I replied curtly. "She is a monster. I'm me. I'm the same as I always was, just with a few physical changes. That's all."
"Like the fact you drink blood. You drank Noah's blood, didn't you? Isn't that what she said?"
I nodded, unable to find a more suitable response. "There are so many things I need to explain to you. I don't really know where to begin. Maybe it would be easiest if you asked me questions? Perhaps that would work?" It was Finn's turn to nod, and I knew that, just like me, he was struggling. However, when he did finally speak, it wasn't with a question at all.
"I'm sorry about your dad," he said. "He was a good man. A really good man."
He was.
"What happened to him? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," he added hastily.
No, it's fine. You deserve to know. And so it started. I talked him through how I'd been changed, that I had no idea who'd sired me, or that my mother was the one who'd instigated the entire thing. I told him about Christopher and not knowing what I'd done to him, and that it only happened because I'd gone to see him. At this point, Finn's demeanour changed.
"You could have told me," he said. "You could have trusted me with this."
I know. I know I could have. He lifted his gaze to the ceiling, and I didn't know if it was to avoid looking at me or to stop me seeing the tears that were welling in his eyes. I suspect it was a bit of both.
"Honestly, losing you, Rin, it was like having my heart ripped out."
I laughed sadly. You don't need to tell me that. I went through the same thing. At least you had things to distract you. Places you could go. Other people to have relationships with. I didn't mean it as a dig about marrying Kalina. I didn't mean it as anything at all, except to try to get him to understand what my life had been like. But I could tell that was what he assumed from the way his face fell.
"You know, part of me knew something wasn't right about Kalina when I met her. She was too good to be true. But I needed something to take away the pain, the loneliness. And she filled that gap so well. I just couldn't."
He paused.
"I think that's why I was so angry at Noah. Not because of what he did. Of course, I was mad about that. I'm not a saint. But because I already knew deep down that she was playing me. But why? What did being with me give her? If she didn't genuinely love me? Of course, I know that now. But Noah being the one to show me the truth is what hurt the most. And the thing is, when he wrecked my marriage, he proved to me what a farce the whole thing had been. Because my heart didn't break. Not like it broke when I lost you."
An invisible clamp was squeezing my chest. I wanted to tell him exactly how much I had loved him, and probably always would on some level. But now I loved his brother. And yes, our relationship was flawed, but it was real and true. That was what I wanted to tell him. But I couldn't. I knew it would be too painful. I don't believe you were ever truly married, I said, suddenly thinking about something that wasn't centered around me or Noah.
"What do you mean?"
Well, think about it. We have absolutely no idea what Kalina's age is. Do we? I'm willing to bet she's at least 100, if not a darn sight more. She could be 500 years old for all we know.
"Please, don't," Finn said, putting a hand to his head. "This is making me feel physically sick."
She's still hot even if she's a millennia old, I said, trying to reassure him. But whoever she is, I thoroughly doubt her actual name is Kalina. And there's no way her birth certificate would be genuine. I'm fairly sure you can't marry someone who's technically dead. Not without getting arrested or sectioned. Finn took a moment, chewing down on his bottom lip as he thought about it.
"So you're saying I could go to court and ask to have my marriage annulled on the basis that my ex-wife was dead
at the time? That's exactly what I'm saying.
I'm not sure that's going to work.
It was, however, the first time he'd managed a weak smile, though it faded fast.
I can't believe you're dead, he said, his gaze fixed on me. It doesn't make sense.
I'm only partly dead. His eyes drifted away from me towards his brother.
And he knows all of this?
He does. I was sure we were getting to the bit I'd been dreading, but there was no avoiding it now.
I guess you better tell me about the two of you then, Finn said.
I suggested we move to the kitchen. I know you probably think I'm being ridiculous, but speaking about Noah in front of him just didn't feel right. You read all the time about people in comas hearing everything that's being said around them, right? Finally being truthful with Finn was like breathing fresh air for the first time since I'd seen him all those days ago. And speaking about Noah was easier than I'd imagined it would be. I told him about Lovisa's party and the bowling alley and all of the things that came after. He's the only person outside the family in Lovisa who knows, I said. And now you. That's it.
And he found out because you attacked him?
Pretty much. Finn rested an index finger on his lips.
Is it wrong that I feel good about that?
That I attacked your brother?
No. Well, yes, kind of. But I mean the fact that he found out like I did. By accident. Somehow that's easier to bear than hearing you trusted him enough to tell him.
I trusted you, remember? I was going to tell you that night I came to your house. Finn nodded, although it was clear he was now only half listening. He was looking past me through the open door into the living room, where Glen was back sitting with Noah.
I thought about contacting him so many times, he said. I got his number from Mum. It's on my phone, but every time I went to call him, something would stop me. I just felt so damn angry.
That's understandable, I said. After what he did to you.
I know, but I should have been the bigger person. He tried to reach out at least a dozen times, and I just ignored him. Now, I might never get the chance.
Refusing to let Finn's negativity seep into me, I snatched his hand from across the table, tugging just hard enough to bring his attention back to me. Don't think like that, I said. Kalina will find an answer. She owes you that much. I'm not sure he believed that Kalina would do the right thing any more than I did. But I left Finn then and moved Noah up to my bed. Then I lay down next to him and cried. Water wastage be damned. My heart was shredded. That's the only way I can describe it. It still is. It feels like my chest is filled with shards of glass that are digging themselves deeper and deeper into my bones. If Glen hadn't come up, I might have cried myself dry. It certainly felt like I could. He knocked on the door, but I didn't turn to him, just remained with my head buried in Noah's shirt, absorbing his scent.
Finn wants to spend the night on the sofa, he said,
assuming I'd be listening, even if I wasn't looking at him.
You okay with that?
I grunted, which could have been taken either way, but I couldn't manage any more. Glen lingered in the doorway. I wanted him to leave, but instead he stepped all the way into the room, knelt down next to the bed, and wrapped his arms around me. And then my tears started flowing again. How does this keep happening to us? I sobbed, turning around and clinging to my baby brother. Why do I keep losing them?
You're not going to lose them. I promise, he said.
But we both knew, just as it had been when I said the same thing to Finn, it might be a vow that couldn't be kept. Blog post 102. Date, October 5th. Followers, 62,952. No one expects their heart to be broken. No one goes into a relationship letting their barriers down, exposing their most vulnerable side, anticipating ending up a snivelling, unwashed wreck on their bathroom floor. But at the same time, you understand the risks. You learn pretty early on that the path to true love can be a rocky one. But you don't generally think that heartbreak will be caused by your own parent. My mother, the woman who nursed me and loved me, was also the person who destroyed me. Her betrayal hurt more keenly than I think any man ever could. Maybe that's why hearing about Noah's previous engagement didn't cut me to the core the way Finn probably had expected it to. I'd already suffered worse than that. The thing is, part of me thought I was getting over it, that I was moving on with my life, slowly putting all the pain she'd caused behind me. But that was before today. The doorbell sounded, causing me to immediately leap from my bed. Kalina's declaration that she knew someone could help had felt like a hollow promise. Not that I expected anything more from her. Yet her voice was calling from outside. "Yoo-hoo, Merrewyn, we're here." Had all my faculties been in working order, I would have taken my usual precautionary sniff, which would have prepared me for what was to come, to some extent. But instead, I rushed down and swung open the front door. The air caught in my throat. "You have to be joking," I said. "What?" Kalina asked innocently, before barging past me, the dog under her arm. "A doctor with experience in vampire genetics. Who could be better?" I was stunned, not only by the fact that my mother was there, but by her appearance too. "Mum?" Glen's confused voice mirrored my own sentiments exactly. The woman standing in front of us looked almost nothing like our mother. She was dressed in drab, baggy clothes, and her hair was unkempt, with grey roots 1.5 inches long showing above the dull, brassy blonde. Bare-faced, without a scrap of makeup, dark grey circles ringed her eyes, and her sallow skin sank into the hollows of her cheeks. "My babies, my darling babies," she sobbed, her eyes welling up with tears. "I'm so sorry about everything. Kalina promised she would give me time, that she wouldn't contact you. I never expected. I never knew she—" "We're not talking about that now," I said, cutting her off. I was more than a little tempted to slam the door in her face, but Noah needed help, and if Kalina wasn't allowing us the option of taking him to hospital, then we had to accept whatever was on offer. "Did she tell you?" I said. "Did she explain why we need your help?" Nodding slowly, my mother moved towards the front door, but stopped, her foot hovering on the threshold. If the whole thing about vampires needing to be invited into the house had been true, she would definitely have come across as one of the undead. By her feet were 2 cases. One of them I recognised as her doctor's bag, which went almost everywhere with her. She wasn't staying with us. I was about to say that, but she got there first. "I'll sort a hotel," she said, before carrying on in a voice so desperate it was almost as unrecognisable as her appearance. "Merrewyn, darling, please believe me. If I'd have known what she was doing with the venom, if I'd have known that you—" "Answer the question. Do you know why you're here? Do you know what has happened?" She nodded slowly, her eyes moving behind me to Glen. His jaw was locked, fury radiating from him. I still wish I could have slammed the door in her face just for the pure satisfaction of doing it. Just for Glen. But I couldn't. I stepped back and gave her the room to enter. "He's upstairs. I don't know exactly what Kalina's told you, but he's had a mixture of 2 venoms. One from a small bite she gave him, and a second, larger amount from a vial, which may be a derivative of mine, but I can't be sure. Kalina thinks that the speed at which he collapsed means he had an allergic reaction to the combination." My mother nodded again. "Do you have a sample?" she asked. "The one you think is yours?" I gestured to Glen, who disappeared to fetch the remaining 2 vials of V, returning just a few seconds later. As he went to pass them to her, Mum took hold of his other hand. "Glen, you know what I did was the best for the family. You understand that, don't you? I needed to keep Merrewyn with us. I had to keep us together."
"Here are your samples," he said, pulling away.
As crazy as it probably sounds, seeing Glen like that was one of the worst parts of the day. He's been through so much more than a kid of his age should ever have to face. A part of him just must have wanted to wrap his arms around Mum and bury his head on her shoulder and cry, like he'd done when he was a little boy. Let's be honest, there was a massive part of me that wanted to do that too. "Okay, let's take a look at what we've got here then," Mum said, tucking the vials into her pocket. "Upstairs?" Strangely, Glen's rejection seemed to have had a positive effect on her, as she snapped out of her previous mood and gained a modicum of her old focus. She grabbed her medical bag and followed me upstairs. I pointed towards my bedroom. The first part of her examination appeared standard. Like Finn, she went straight for the pulse, then the temperature and blood pressure, and listened to his lungs. "He seems to have slipped into a state of torpor." "Of what?" "Torpor. Hibernation. He has a lower body temperature and breathing rate. Lower pulse." "Hibernation. Like bears," I said, butting in. "Do people do that?" "No," she said, reaching in her case and pulling out a series of surgical bags containing tubes, needles and a syringe. Placing them on the bedside table, she took a rubber strap and started to tighten it around Noah's upper arm. "What are you going to do?" I said, grabbing her hand to stop her. "I need to take blood. Kalina's sorting out somewhere for me to do tests, for today at least." "Why do you need to do that?" "Merrewyn, honey, I've never seen this before. I've only ever worked with your venom, remember? If I can take some samples from Noah, then I can run some tests. I promise I only want to help him." "And will he come out of this hibernation?" I said. She paused. "I don't know. Normally it occurs in animals when their temperature drops sufficiently. They come out of it when it gets warmer." "Can we try heating him up?" I suggested. "Maybe, but I can't be sure yet. It could just as easily cause him to overheat. But he seems stable for now. So if I can do some blood work, I can hopefully understand why the venom caused him to be in this suspended animation." I still didn't let go of her. Finn, who I'd forgotten was staying the night, was standing in the doorway, and I found myself staring at him. After all, I might have been Noah's girlfriend, but Finn was family. When it came to serious decisions like this, I knew he had to be the one to make the call. I managed to convey that to him without even speaking. "If she thinks you can help him,
Then let her, he said.
Mum looked around and her eyes widened.
Finley, she said, I didn't realise. How have you been?
He's been better, Mum, I said curtly. Now can we get on with this? My mother turned back, peeled off the sterile wrappings and fixed a needle into the syringe. A moment later, the tube was filling with Noah's blood. I couldn't help but wonder if those endorphins were still floating around in there somewhere. Just a hint of the happiness remaining. Or had all that disappeared the moment Finn had entered the house? I thought of the blood in my fridge. Was that to be my final taste of Noah? Quite possibly.
Now what?
Glen asked, as Mum sealed the tube and dropped it in her bag.
Now what are you going to do?
Now I'm going to see if there's a way out of this, she replied.
You've been listening to the latest instalment of Love Bites, Book 2 in the Bloodsuckers blog trilogy. Written by Ella Stone, narrated by Hannah Lynn, and produced by Papercat Publishing.